Welcome back to Horror Drift Stories. Before we start, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. If you enjoy slow, unsettling tales, don't forget to like and subscribe. Quick note, there might be a few ads at the beginning, but after 10 minutes, no interruptions. So, relax. Let the silence settle in. And let's begin. Story 1. I am writing this from the front seat of my car. The dog bed is still sitting in the passenger seat beside me, empty now, and I keep finding myself looking over at it like he might still be there if I just wait long enough. It has been 3 days since I walked out of that job, and in those 3 days, I have barely slept. Maybe an hour at a time, never more. Every time I close my eyes, I see that kennel again. I see the bright fluorescent lights, the long white aisle, the blood on the floor, and my dog's body hitting the linoleum. I am posting this because I need a record of what happened. I need someone, somewhere, to know what took place in that building. This is a warning to anyone who ever thinks about taking a late-night security job at a place like that. But more than that, it is for him. My dog was the only family I had left, and he saved my life. He knew exactly what he was doing when he ran into that room. He knew the danger before I did, and he gave up his life to get me out. A few months ago, I had nothing. I mean that literally. I was out of money, out of options, and living in my car with my dog. He was a scruffy terrier mix, medium-sized, rough-looking in a lovable kind of way, with smart brown eyes, and a face that always seemed to know what I was thinking before I did. I had adopted him from a shelter years earlier, back when my life was still holding together. Over time, he became more than a pet. He became my routine, my responsibility, and my reason to keep going when everything else started falling apart. When you are broke and sleeping in a car, the world shrinks down very quickly. You stop thinking about long-term plans. You stop thinking about the future. You start living from one day to the next. Through all of that, he stayed with me. He was the only constant I had. I spent my days sitting in parking lots, using my phone to apply for jobs. I looked for anything I could get, but I focused mostly on night shifts. Sleeping in your car during the day is easier than trying to do it at night when police officers knock on the window and ask questions. I figured if I could work nights, I could survive a little longer and maybe save enough money to crawl my way back into something resembling a normal life. That was when I found the job listing. It was for an overnight monitoring position at a high-end dog boarding facility. The pay seemed unusually good for how simple the job sounded. The duties were basic. Sit at the front desk, monitor the security cameras, clean up if any of the boarded dogs had accidents, and make sure the place stayed quiet through the night. The moment I saw that the manager allowed employees on night shift to bring their own dogs with them, I accepted as soon as they offered it. I did not hesitate. It sounded almost perfect. The facility itself was far more luxurious than I expected. It did not look like a kennel. It did not even look like a place for animals. The lobby had polished tile floors, leather chairs, expensive-looking artwork, and the kind of clean smell you only find in places that charge too much money. The boarding area was behind a set of double doors. It was one long central aisle with luxury suites on both sides, 21 on the left and 21 on the right. No metal cages, no chain-link fencing. Each suite had a glass front, heated floors, and thick walls to reduce noise. Soft classical music played through speakers in the ceiling all night to keep the dogs calm. At the very end of the aisle was a heavy metal door with a crash bar that led to an enclosed outdoor run, bordered by thick woods. My first night started at 11. The daytime staff showed me around quickly, handed me a ring of keys, and then left. Just like that. The building was mine until morning. I set my dog's bed under the reception desk, and he curled up there immediately, like he had done it 100 times before. He looked comfortable, and seeing that made me relax too. For the first time in a while, I felt like maybe I had caught a break. Then I noticed the note. It was taped to the bottom edge of the computer monitor at the front desk, a plain white piece of paper with handwritten instructions. Most of it looked normal. Check water bowls. Make sure all suite doors are secured. Write down any illness or unusual behavior in the clipboard ledger. Standard stuff. But at the bottom, under a heading that had been bolded and underlined, there were 2 extra rules. At 2 a.m., count the dogs. There should be exactly 42. If you count 43, find the dog that doesn't have a shadow, open the back door, and ask it politely to leave. Do not look it in the eyes. I stared at that part for a long time before I laughed. I was alone in this clean, expensive, professional-looking building, and somebody had left a haunted house joke taped to the monitor like it was part of official policy. I thought it was hazing, the kind of prank older employees play on the new night worker to mess with them once they realize he is sitting by himself in a quiet building after midnight. The counting part seemed reasonable enough. There were 42 suites occupied, and I guessed they wanted the night shift to confirm that everything matched the logbook. But the part about a dog with no shadow, that was ridiculous. I crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash by the desk. For the first 2 weeks, that job felt like a miracle. I mean it. It was the easiest money I had ever made. I would sit at the front desk, watch movies on my phone, occasionally stretch my legs, and pet my dog while he dozed under the desk. Just before 2 in the morning, I would grab the clipboard, go into the boarding area, and do the count. 21 on the left, 21 on the right, 42. Every time. My dog usually came with me, walking beside me down the center aisle, stopping here and there to sniff near the glass doors before following me back to the desk. It became a routine almost immediately, and like all routines, it made me comfortable. Too comfortable. The 3rd week was when that ended. It was a Tuesday. Nothing unusual had happened during the first part of the shift. The building was quiet. The music was low and soft. My dog was asleep under the desk while I sat scrolling on my phone. Around 1:50 in the morning, he stood up suddenly. Not the usual way dogs wake up. He did not stretch. He did not yawn. He did not shake himself awake. He just rose instantly and stiffened. His nose pushed hard against my knee. I reached down automatically, thinking he wanted attention, but he moved away from my hand. Then he started whining. It was a deep, nervous sound from the back of his throat. Not loud, but urgent. He circled my chair in tight, anxious loops, his nails clicking rapidly on the tile. Then he went to the front glass doors, stared out into the parking lot, looked back at me, and came right back. He shoved his head under my arm like he was trying to lift me out of the chair. Then he returned to the front door, scratched at the glass, and whined louder. It took me a moment to understand what he was doing. He was trying to herd me. He wanted me to leave the building. At the time, I got it completely wrong. I thought he needed to go outside. I figured maybe his stomach was upset, or maybe he just could not wait until my next break. I leaned down, rubbed his side, and spoke to him the way I always did, trying to calm him down. I told him to wait 10 more minutes. I said I just needed to do the 2 a.m. count first, and then I would take him out. He did not calm down. If anything, he got worse. When I stood and picked up the clipboard, he backed away from me. His tail was tucked tight under him, and his whole body was trembling. When I headed toward the double doors into the boarding area, He did not follow me. He stayed at the desk, frozen, staring at me with those wide eyes that said more than any sound ever could. I should have stopped right there. I know that now. Instead, I shook my head, muttered something about him being weird, and pushed through the double doors alone. The boarding room was dim. The main overhead lights were off as usual, leaving only the low floor lights along the center aisle. They threw long shadows across the polished floor. The classical music was still playing, but the temperature felt colder than normal. Not freezer cold, just damp and heavy, like the air in there had changed while I wasn't looking. I started my count. Left side first, like always. 1, 2, 3. The dogs were mostly asleep, curled up in blankets, or sprawled on their heated floors. A few lifted their heads as I passed. I kept going all the way to the end near the back door. 20. 2. I stopped. I checked the clipboard. 21 dogs listed for the left side. I counted again with my eyes slower this time, but I got the same number. Then I turned and counted the right side. 20. 1. 43 total. And still, even then, I didn't think about the note. Not really. I was irritated, not scared. I assumed a day employee had taken a late check-in and forgotten to update the log. My only thought was that I didn't want to hand off bad paperwork in the morning. The problem was, I could not easily tell where the extra dog was. The lighting was too dim. Some suites were deep enough that the corners stayed in shadow, and I could not see clearly through all the glass. I wanted to identify the dog and make a note of it, so I walked to the wall panel near the front doors and flipped on the main lights. The room exploded with bright white light, and in the exact same second, every sound stopped. Not faded, not lowered, stopped. All 42 boarded dogs were awake now. Every single one of them. They were pressed as far back into the corners of their suites as their bodies would go. Some were shaking violently. Some had their faces buried under their paws. A few were staring with wide, white-rimmed eyes. None of them barked. None of them growled. None of them made a sound at all. It was the kind of silence animals make, only when they are more afraid than I had ever seen anything be. I looked down the center aisle. That was when I saw the extra dog. It stood in the middle of the walkway, halfway between me and the back door. Not inside a suite, just standing there in the open. At first, it almost looked like a large gray hound. That was the first impression. But the longer I looked, the less it resembled anything real. Its legs were too long and too thin, and the joints bent backward in places they should not. Its body looked like it had been wrapped in dark rusted wire instead of fur, thick strands crossing over each other, around a frame that seemed too narrow to support itself. The overhead lights threw shadows from the kennel doors, the water bowls, the benches, even from my own body. But the floor behind that thing was empty. No shadow. The note came crashing back into my head all at once. Find the dog that doesn't have a shadow. Open the back door. Ask it politely to leave. Do not look it in the eyes. And because I was stupid, because I had already broken the most important part, because I had turned on all the lights and stared too long, trying to make sense of it, the thing slowly turned its head toward me. I looked directly into its eyes. They were flat yellow circles. No pupils, no depth, no shine. Just two solid discs of yellow fixed on my face. The second our eyes met, the pressure in the room changed so fast my ears popped. The air thickened. My chest locked up like I was trying to breathe underwater. Then fear hit me. Not normal fear. Not the fear of seeing something dangerous. This was like a physical force, slamming into my body from the inside. A full-body panic, so intense it swallowed thought. I wanted to run. I knew I needed to run, but I could not move. My arms would not lift, my legs would not turn. I could not blink. I could not scream. I was trapped in my own body, pinned there by that stare. And the thing started to change. Its limbs cracked and snapped as it raised itself higher. The wire-like fur scraped together with a metallic sound. Then its head tilted, and its lower jaw came loose. It tore downward with a wet, awful sound until it hung against its chest. Inside its mouth, there were no fangs. There were rows of square white human teeth, dozens of them, tight together, grinding. It lowered itself, ready to spring at my throat, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to die standing there, without ever even falling. Then something brown shot past my legs. My dog. He had followed me in after all. He came down that aisle at full speed and slammed himself into the side of the thing with every bit of force his body had. The impact was enough to throw its balance off. Its head snapped away from mine. The eye contact broke, and the paralysis vanished instantly. I staggered backward into the wall and gasped like I had been drowning. My dog had his teeth sunk into that wire-like body, shaking his head violently. He was not a big dog, but he was fearless when it came to protecting me. For one impossible second, I thought maybe he had heard it. Instead, the creature came apart. Its shape collapsed into something that did not belong in the real world. The body stopped being a dog and became a shifting tangle of black angles and sharp lines that folded through each other wrong, like pieces of geometry trying to crawl out of 3 dimensions. One of those black angles shot out suddenly, hard and fast, like a spear. It went straight through my dog's side. He yelped, not barked, not growled, a short, shocked, painful sound that I will never forget as long as I live. The force threw him backward. He hit the floor and slid, leaving blood across the white linoleum. When he stopped, he tried to get up and could not. The shifting thing folded back into the shape of the hound. It turned those yellow eyes toward me again. This time I could move. And finally, my brain remembered the rest of the rule. Open the back door. I ran. I sprinted down the center aisle as fast as I could, past the cowering dogs and their sweets, past the place where my dog lay bleeding, and toward the heavy metal door at the far end. The thing moved, but it was not fast enough to stop me before I hit the crash bar with my full weight. The door flew open. Cold night air rushed in from outside. The creature recoiled instantly. It collapsed backward, like the air itself was burning it. The body lost shape again, then scrambled low across the floor in a blur of bent limbs and dark lines. It did not come after me. It did not touch my dog again. It bolted through the doorway and vanished into the black woods beyond the outdoor run. I slammed the metal door shut and threw the deadbolt with shaking hands. Then everything was quiet. Not normal quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after screaming. The dogs in the suites slowly began to move again, whining softly, still pressed into their corners. But I barely heard them. I dropped to my knees and crawled to my dog. The wound was terrible. There was too much blood. Even before I touched him, I knew it was bad. I pulled off my jacket and pressed it against his side, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to tell myself I could carry him to the car, find an emergency vet, fix this somehow. I kept talking to him. I begged him to stay with me. I told him we were leaving. I told him he was okay. I told him he was such a good boy. He never tried to stand up again. He just laid there with his chin resting on my knee. His breathing was fast at first, then weaker. He looked up at me one last time, and in that moment, his eyes were calm. Tired, but calm. Then he licked my wrist. A small, gentle lick, and that was it. His chest stopped moving. I do not know how long I sat there holding him. Hours, I think. Maybe all the way until dawn. I did not clean up the blood. I did not touch the cameras. I did not check the suites. I just sat on the kennel floor, under those bright lights, with his body against my chest, because putting him down felt impossible. When the morning manager unlocked the front doors at 6, he found me there. He stepped into the lobby, came through the double doors, and stopped immediately when he saw the blood and saw me holding my dog. He looked at me, then he looked at the locked back door. Then he looked back at me, and he did not ask a single question. That was the part that made it worse. He knew, or at least he knew enough. He lowered his head, took his walkie-talkie off his belt, and quietly told the rest of the staff to stay in the front lobby. He did not come any closer. He did not try to explain. He did not even pretend to be surprised. I never spoke to him. I stood up, picked up my dog, and carried him through the boarding area, through the lobby, and out into the cold morning air. I laid him carefully in the passenger seat of my car, right on his bed, and drove away. I did not quit with words. I did not send an email. I did not call. I just never went back. 3 days have passed since then. I drove out to the countryside, near the area where I grew up, and buried him deep in the woods, under a large oak tree. It felt like the only place quiet enough for him. Since then, I have spent most of my time in this car, parked, staring at the empty dog bed beside me, and trying to accept what happened. The truth is simple, and it hurts more the longer I sit with it. At 1:50 that night, he already knew. He was not restless. He was not asking for a bathroom break. He was trying to save me. He sensed whatever that thing was before I ever opened the doors. He tried to herd me out of the building because he understood danger in a way I did not. He stood there, terrified, begging me without words to leave, and I ignored him. I patted his side, told him to wait, and walked into that room because I thought I knew better. Even then, even after I ignored every warning he gave me, he still followed when he realized I was in trouble. He ran into a room full of terror and bright light, and something impossible because I was there. He gave me the one thing I did not deserve from him in that moment. He gave me his life. That note on the computer was not a joke. That facility knew exactly what could happen at 2 a.m. They knew enough to write rules for it. They knew enough to leave some poor bastard on the night shift with instructions and no real explanation. Maybe they thought that was enough. Maybe they had convinced themselves nobody would ever look the thing in the eyes if the rules were written down clearly enough. But rules on paper are not the same thing as truth told out loud. If they had looked me in the face and said, "At 2 a.m, something enters the kennel. It looks like a dog, but it is not a dog. Do not turn on the bright lights. Do not stare at it. If you see an extra animal and it has no shadow, open the back door and tell it to leave. If you make eye contact, it can lock your body in place." If they had said that plainly, maybe I would have believed enough to be careful. Maybe not. I do not know. What I do know is that my dog believed. He did not need explanations. He did not need proof. He knew that building had gone wrong before I ever understood it, and he still came for me. So I am writing this because I need his sacrifice to exist somewhere outside my own head. I need there to be a record, not of the creature, not even of the facility, though God help anyone who takes a job there after midnight. I need there to be a record of him. He was loyal when I had nothing. He stayed with me when I was sleeping in parking lots and living off gas station food. He made cold nights in a car feel less empty. He listened when there was nobody else. He trusted me when I gave him no reason to that night. And in the end, when I failed to understand what he was trying to tell me, he did the only thing he could do. He saved me anyway. I still reach over sometimes, half awake, expecting to feel his fur in that bed beside me. I still catch myself listening for his nails on the floor, or the small sounds he made when he settled down to sleep. The silence afterward is the worst part. Worse than the lights, worse than the blood, worse than those yellow eyes. He was a good dog, better than I deserved. The best friend I ever had, and every breath I take from this point on belongs partly to him. Story 2. A couple of years ago, I saw a guy dressed as a jester while I was walking home. It wasn't scary or anything like that, just awkward in a way that made you want to look away. The outfit was bright, colorful, and way too much for a normal street. He was holding a stack of leaflets and trying to hand them out, but people were clearly avoiding him. Most just walked past like he didn't exist. I probably would have done the same, but he stepped right in front of me and held one out. Hey, 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 step right in. The fun starts when you arrive at Blue Carnival Island, he said in a loud, exaggerated voice. I frowned at him. Sorry, he said quickly, dropping the act almost immediately. I know it looks weird. If I don't hit a sign-up quota, they'll make me wear the hat too. He made a face like even he didn't like the idea. I looked down at the leaflet. Blue Carnival Island Experience. There was a logo underneath from some energy company I didn't recognize. A holiday? I asked. Yeah, he said, smiling, still a little embarrassed. It's a group trip. Flights, hotel, everything included. It's actually really good. You don't sound very convincing. I'm better when people don't look directly at me, he said. Kind of ruins the whole thing. Then he smiled again. But this time it felt normal, not forced, not part of the act. I laughed without meaning to, and somehow we ended up talking for way longer than I expected, just standing there on the street. That night, we started texting. His name was Matt, and he was easy to talk to in a way that felt natural. At first, we joked about the costume. Then the conversations got longer. We talked about random things, hobbies, life, stuff that didn't feel important but somehow was. A few days later, we met again. This time he wasn't wearing the costume, and I noticed something right away. He was actually really good looking. Without the makeup and all that, he seemed completely different. We had lunch together, just talking, laughing, enjoying the moment. As we were about to leave, he brought up the trip again. I do need to get paid, remember, he said with a grin. No pressure, though. After some joking back and forth, I asked him for the details. He explained everything clearly, but there was one thing that stood out. I get a bonus if the group stays together, he said. That's kind of their whole thing. He paused for a second, like he almost didn't want to say it. It's a structured experience. I didn't think too much about it at the time. It sounded like one of those organized group vacations where everyone stays in the same place. A week later, I signed up. My friends Chloe and Tyler came too. I convinced them it would just be something fun we could laugh about later. When we got to the bus station, there were a lot more people than I expected. Around 60, maybe more. Families, couples, older people, all gathered together. Matt showed up in the jester costume again, moving through the crowd, hyping everyone up, making it feel like an event. It was actually fun. When he saw me, he came over. "Sarah, you made it." "Of course," I said. "I'm your best recruit." "Not even close," he said, smiling. "But I'll pretend you are." Before we got on the bus, he gathered everyone together. "One thing," he said, clapping his hands. "When we get there, stay with the group. Don't wander off alone." "Why?" someone asked. He hesitated, just for a second. "Wouldn't want anyone getting lost." At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. Everything stayed normal until Amsterdam. Our flight got delayed overnight, and we had to stay in a hotel. Matt handled everything quickly, booking rooms, organizing people, keeping things calm. It was actually impressive. At the hotel, people relaxed, had drinks, made the best of it. I went to see Matt. His room was almost empty. No suitcase, no clothes lying around, just a single bag. "You travel light," I said. "I don't stay in one place long," he replied. We talked for hours until it got dark. Then that night, I woke up to loud knocking on my door. It was urgent. I opened it, still half asleep. Matt was standing there, but something was wrong. He wasn't smiling. He looked pale, tense. "You need to leave," he said. "What?" "I booked you a flight. It leaves in an hour. You have to go now." He handed me a ticket. I just stared at him. "What about everyone else?" I asked. "I'll handle it." "No, Matt, what's going on?" He stepped closer and looked straight into my eyes. "Sarah, I don't have time to explain. You just have to trust me. Then tell Chloe and Tyler." I said I'll handle it. The way he said it made me stop. My heart was racing. Then he kissed me, not softly, not gently. It felt desperate. "Please go," he said quietly. And I did. I didn't argue. I didn't question it. Something in his voice made me believe him. I packed quickly, my hands shaking. The room felt wrong, like it wasn't safe anymore. Every sound in the hallway made me nervous. The airport felt too normal compared to everything else. I kept checking my phone, waiting for a message from him. Nothing came. On the flight home, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. The way he looked at me, like he was holding something back. When I got home, I told everyone I had gotten sick and came back early. Chloe and Tyler messaged me a day later, saying they made it to the island and everything was great. Chloe even said I missed out. Everything seemed normal. But I couldn't forget that night. After that, Matt and I stopped talking. Time passed. Weeks, then months. And then something started to feel off. At first it was small things. Chloe would laugh at the wrong times, forget things she shouldn't. Tyler was quieter, less expressive. I tried to ignore it. Then one night at Chloe's house, everything changed. We were cooking together like we used to. She was talking, but I wasn't really listening. I was watching her. Then she paused, repeated a word, and suddenly her eyes rolled back. Not like normal. They spun fast, too fast, until there was nothing but white. I screamed, then it stopped. She blinked, confused. "Sarah, are you okay?" she asked. I couldn't speak. After a moment, she laughed it off, said she felt dizzy. We went back to cooking like nothing happened. But I knew. I called Matt that night. At first, he avoided answering. Then he sighed. "Can we meet?" he said. When he came over, I asked him directly, "What happened on that island?" He didn't answer right away. Then he asked me something strange. "Do you believe there are other versions of you?" I said no. He nodded. Then he explained. Different versions of people exist, depending on choices, different lives, different outcomes. Some of those versions suffer a lot. The island, he said, is where they switch people. I stared at him. The version of you that goes there doesn't come back. My stomach dropped. They take versions from worse places, he continued, and replace them. Then they adjust the memories. That's insane, I said. I know. But why? Because it creates energy, he said. A lot of it. And you? I work for them. Why, tell me? Because I couldn't send you there. Then he told me what happened to him. He had been taken once, years ago. Hurt, tortured. Then suddenly, it all stopped, and he woke up somewhere else. A facility. People lying on beds, unconscious, being changed. He had been switched. The version of him from this world had gone on a trip. He took his place. They gave him a choice. Forget everything, or remember, and work for them. He chose to remember. Now, he has to recruit people, at least 10 every cycle. If he doesn't, they erase his memory and replace it, like nothing ever happened, like everyone else. That's when everything made sense. Chloe, Tyler. They weren't the same. They weren't the ones I knew, and it was my fault. I brought them there. If Matt hadn't stopped me, I would have been replaced too. Now I'm the only one who knows. And even if I told anyone, no one would believe me. That was the last real conversation we had about it. Over time, life continued. We stayed together. I don't feel safe without him. He's the only one who understands. Sometimes things feel normal again. We go to work, we see friends. We act like everything is fine. But it's not. I still see him come home in that jester costume. It doesn't look funny anymore. It doesn't look harmless. As long as he meets his quota, nothing changes. He stays the same. The man I met that night. And he will keep meeting it, because he has to. Story 3. My hand tightened around the bathroom sink, while my tongue moved carefully over the smooth edge of my last molar. I could feel it loosening inside my gum, feel the roots giving way little by little, and when I pushed against it again, a wave of pleasure rushed through me so suddenly that my knees almost failed. It spread through my whole body, hot and overwhelming, the kind of relief that makes you forget yourself for a moment. I tilted my head back and held on to the feeling, trying to make it last, trying to stay inside it for as long as I could. Then the grip of the tooth broke completely. The molar slipped free and rolled into the back of my mouth. Instinctively, I tried to press my tongue into the empty space it left behind, searching for the last trace of that strange joy, hoping to taste whatever had just passed through me. But all I found was blood. A soft copper taste filled my mouth. The hollow in my gum throbbed dully, and with every pulse the pleasure faded farther away, draining out of me until all that remained was an ache and a terrible emptiness. I bent over the sink and spat. Blood splashed across the porcelain, and the tooth fell with a small clink before beginning its slow slide toward the drain. The moment I saw it moving away from me, panic shot through my body. It was not an ordinary kind of panic. It was not the sort that comes from losing something useful or expensive. It was deeper than that. It felt like something sacred was being taken from me. That tooth belonged to me in a way nothing else ever had, and I could not let it disappear into the darkness. I should have reached for it immediately. I should have moved without thinking. But for one strange frozen second, I could not control my body at all. My eyes followed it as it drifted over the thin stream of blood and saliva, inching toward the black mouth of the drain. My muscles locked. Every part of me tensed, helpless, while it moved closer and closer to vanishing. Then, just as it reached the edge, my body jerked forward with a speed that did not feel like my own, and my fingers closed around it. I had saved it, just as I had saved all the others. A part of me had always known I would save this one too. That was the worst part. The thing that frightened me most was not the loss of the tooth, or even the feeling that came with it. It was the knowledge that none of this had ever truly been my choice. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being the one in charge. I sank down onto the bathroom floor, clutching the molar so tightly in my fist that its edges pressed into my palm. I held it like someone might come and steal it away from me, like I had to protect it from the whole world. And sitting there on the cold tile, with blood still dripping from my mouth, I began to cry. It started 31 days ago. That first morning had been completely normal in every possible way. My alarm went off at the usual time. I dragged myself out of bed feeling tired and annoyed. I made coffee that tasted stale and cheap, the same brand I always bought because it was the only one I could afford. I went through my routine without thinking. Shower, clothes, bathroom mirror, nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. If anyone had told me that morning what the next month of my life would become, I would have laughed at them. After brushing my teeth, I looked in the mirror and noticed something wrong. One of my canines was slightly out of place. That was all. Just a tiny tilt, made easier to notice by the harsh LED bulb above the sink. I remember leaning in closer, baring my teeth at my own reflection, and feeling the first strange pull inside myself. It was not pain. It was not worry. It was desire. The need came to me fully formed. I did not build up to it. It arrived complete. I wanted that tooth, not in the casual sense of wanting to fix it or get it checked. I wanted to claim it, to pull it free with my own fingers, to hold it in my hand, to keep it somewhere safe, where nobody else could touch it. I stood there for too long, staring at it, even though I was already late for work. Part of me knew the thought was wrong. Not odd, not unhealthy. Wrong. Something in me understood that this was not how people were supposed to react to a loose tooth. But I could not step away from the mirror without feeling that I was abandoning something important. That urge stayed with me all day. At work, I could not stop touching the tooth with my tongue. Every chance I got, I probed it gently, testing how much it moved, feeling the little shift against the gum. I should have been distracted by other things. Emails, tasks, conversation, hunger, time. None of it mattered. That tooth sat in my mouth like a secret, waiting, calling to me. The whole day became a long stretch of anticipation. By the time I got home, I could think of nothing else. I went straight to the bathroom and stood before the mirror again. I searched my face for signs of illness. I pulled down my eyelids. I inspected my gums. I touched my cheeks, my jaw, my throat. I was trying to find some explanation, some evidence that this was part of a larger problem. But everything looked normal, everything except the tooth. The moment I opened my mouth, it seemed to present itself to me. It leaned there at a slight angle, catching the bathroom light like an invitation. Then the feeling changed. It became clearer, sharper, less like temptation and more like instruction. My hand rose toward my mouth almost on its own. My fingers touched the tip of the tooth. At the contact, a soft current moved through me. It started in my jaw and spread down through my neck, shoulders, chest, stomach, all the way to my feet. It was faint at first, almost delicate, but unmistakable. I tapped the tooth again. Another ripple. Then again. The sensation deepened, and with it came hunger. Soon I was rubbing it, gently at first, then more firmly. My eyes slipped shut. My breathing changed. My body twisted against the sink as if it were responding to someone else's touch. Saliva ran over my fingers. I made sounds I did not mean to make, soft and helpless sounds that filled the small bathroom. It was pleasure, yes, but not any kind I had known before. It was more consuming than that, more total. It felt like my whole body had narrowed into one desperate need. I kept going because I wanted the feeling to break open completely. I wanted whatever waited at the end of it. And then it stopped. Just like that, I opened my eyes and found myself staring down at my own hand. The tooth was lying in my palm. For a second, I felt only disappointment. The pleasure had vanished too soon, leaving me empty and confused. Then another thought came, colder and more terrible. I had done this. I had pulled out my own tooth, and I could not remember deciding to do it. There was no pain. There was no real blood. Only the tooth, white and small and alien in my hand. I wanted to throw it away immediately. I wanted to drop it into the trash or flush it or do anything that would end the moment. Instead, I laid it carefully on the edge of the sink and stared at it. I could not stop staring. The roots were dark, not rotten exactly. They looked packed with something black and earthy, like soil pressed into a tiny white shell. When I rubbed some of that dark matter between my fingers, a weak but clear pulse of pleasure moved through me again. Even then, I tried to explain it away. I told myself it was just shock, or some hidden kink rising to the surface in the ugliest possible form. Anything but what it really felt like, because what it felt like was this. The tooth wanted me to keep it, not throw it away, not hide it, keep it close, closer than it had been before. I leaned over the sink before I fully understood what I was doing. My lips parted. I took the tooth into my mouth. The taste was dry and dusty at first, touched with porcelain and old water. My tongue rolled over it, exploring every ridge, every smooth plane, every rough trace of root. I remember opening my eyes in disgust at myself, realizing what my own body had done. Then I swallowed. If you are wondering why I did not get help after that, I have asked myself the same question over and over. The truth is that at first it was easy to lie to myself. I told myself it was one bad moment, one strange compulsion. I considered calling a dentist, but I did not feel pain, and I convinced myself I would only embarrass myself if I went in over one loose tooth. I told myself I would make an appointment in the morning. I told myself I just needed to calm down first. The problem with lies like that is that they are comforting because they sound so reasonable. But morning came, and I never made the call. That was also when the dreams began. I remember one of the early ones clearly, because even now I can still feel the dread of it. In the dream, the room around me was colder than it should have been, but there was no draft, no moonlight through the blinds, no sounds from outside. The silence was heavy, thick enough to taste. It did not feel peaceful. It felt like being trapped in a grave before the dirt had finished falling. I lay there unable to move, my tongue tracing the fresh hole in my gum, tasting something earthy in the blood. Then I heard it. A soft rattle. I could not tell where it was coming from. It seemed to shift from one side of the room to the other, near and far at the same time. I tried to look around, but darkness filled every corner. My breathing became shallow. I wanted to scream, but fear held me down. Rattle. It came again, closer now. Then I felt breath on my face. Warm, foul, damp with the smell of old fabric and rot. I turned my head slowly and saw it leaning over the bed. Its eyes were wet and glassy. Thin strings of hair clung to a balding scalp. Long, narrow arms gripped both sides of the mattress. Hanging from one hand was something pale that swung back and forth with that same soft sound. Teeth. A whole collection of them. I tried to scream. My mouth opened, and before I could make a sound, I understood something with awful certainty. I was not in danger of being hunted. I was already the feast. After that, the nightmares became part of my life. They terrified me every time, but when I woke, the fear was always mixed with something else. Calm, almost. A strange sense of understanding. It was as if the dreams were teaching me something slowly, piece by piece, and some part of me wanted to keep learning. The more teeth I lost, the easier it became to accept what was happening. Some I pulled myself. Others loosened until they slipped free with hardly any effort. A few seemed to vanish during sleep, leaving only blood and a hollow ache behind. Each loss was followed by that same impossible pleasure, that same feeling of being held by something larger and older than myself. The best way I can describe it is this. It felt like being embraced by a mother I did not remember, warm and absolute, and full of terrible love. Then the marks started appearing. At first they were only small bruised circles on my skin, one on my arm, another on my thigh, then more. Each one had a pale center, hard beneath the skin, colder than the flesh around it. They did not frighten me the way they should have. I touched them curiously, almost lovingly. The skin around them sent warm shivers through my body when I pressed it. But the pale center stung sharply if I touched too hard, as if warning me away. Not yet. That was what it seemed to say. As the days passed, my apartment changed in my mind. At first it had felt like a prison, full of blood-stained sheets and dirty dishes and isolation. But slowly, it began to feel like a cocoon, a place where something hidden could ripen. I stopped thinking clearly about what was happening to me. Was I going mad? Was I changing into something? I no longer knew the difference. And worse, I was beginning not to care. I started collecting the teeth that remained. Some I kept in a glass jar on the table. I cleaned them with my fingers and admired them in the light. Each one looked beautiful to me, polished and complete, like tiny sacred relics. I liked them together in the jar. The sight of them comforted me. It felt right that they should remain close to each other, waiting. Sometimes I took them out and held them in my mouth, one by one. I rolled them on my tongue, savoring their taste. I bit down on them carefully with the teeth I still had, feeling the grit and pressure. More than once I swallowed them, driven by the same certainty that had taken the first one. It felt like returning them to where they belonged. And each time, warmth spread through me afterward like a reward. I even tried burying some. I took them outside in the dead hours of the night and pushed them into small patches of soil, then crouched there for long stretches staring at the dirt, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing ever did, but I could feel something beneath the ground, something threading downward, rooting itself. I came to think of it as ritual rather than madness. By then, Time itself had gone strange. The only moments when I felt fully clear were the moments right after losing a tooth. Everything else blurred. Hunger stopped mattering. Sleep became shallow and broken. Hygiene felt pointless. I stopped caring about food because somehow the teeth I swallowed seemed to quiet the emptiness in me more effectively than meals ever had. Whether that was real or just the result of a mind unraveling, I cannot say. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the person there. My eyes were bloodshot and sunken. My mouth was red and swollen. My lips were cracked. Almost all my teeth were gone, leaving behind inflamed gums and wet, dark spaces. Only one remained by the end, standing alone in the ruin, like the last resident of a dead city. Tonight, that last one came loose. I expected pain. I expected blood. I expected some final great moment to justify all of it. Instead, it yielded easily, almost eagerly, and fell into my hand with hardly any resistance. Looking down at it, I felt not relief, but betrayal. Everything I had suffered over the past month had been leading here, to this ending. And all I had in my hand was one small molar and a silence where the pleasure should have been. In anger, I punched the mirror. It shattered instantly. Cracks spread through my reflection, breaking my face into jagged pieces. I wanted to feel something real, something that belonged to me, because normality suddenly felt unnatural. I had been promised something. I could feel that with total certainty. And now, it seemed to be ending without giving me whatever waited at the end. I stumbled out into the living room, clutching the molar. The jar of teeth sat on the table where I had left it, cloudy with old saliva and blood stains. Just seeing it filled me with a terrible understanding. It wanted the last tooth. It wanted the cycle completed. If I dropped the molar in and obeyed, then something would be finished. And I was suddenly certain that once it was finished, I would no longer matter. That thing which had guided me, fed me pleasure, taught me through dreams, would be done with me. It would take what it had grown and leave me hollow. No, I carried the jar back into the bathroom. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. When I unscrewed the lid, a horrible smell spilled out, thick and sweet and rotten. Still, I did not hesitate. I tipped the jar into the sink, and all those precious teeth I had guarded and worshipped came pouring out in a hard white rattle, clinking against the porcelain before sliding into the drain. My reflection in the broken shards seemed to smile at me with empty gums. Then the bleeding began. At first it was only a thin red thread slipping from the places where my gums had been torn raw. Then it became more, thick, dark, choking. It poured into the sink and painted the porcelain. I tried to swallow and could not. My throat filled with the metallic taste. Panic took me all at once. I clawed at the sink and tried to speak, but with no teeth my words came out mangled and wet. Make it stop. It sounded stupid, childish, desperate, but it was all I had. I thought I was dying there, alone, drowning in my own blood. I slid to the floor and clawed at my throat, sobbing, begging whatever had done this to me to stop. At last I said the only thing I could think of. I'll do anything. The effect was immediate. Warmth spread through me again. Not pleasure this time, but relief. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. For one brief second, I thought I had been saved. Then the pain began. It came from everywhere at once. Sharp, deep, stabbing pain, not on the surface, but under the skin. Every bump I had been carrying for days rose violently. I looked down and saw them swelling, pushing upward from within my flesh. There were so many more than I had realized. My arms, my chest, my legs, my stomach. Each pale center was forcing itself toward the surface. I understood at once what I had to do. If I did not let them out, they would split me open themselves. I grabbed a shard of the broken mirror. My hand slipped on blood, but I forced myself to hold it steady. Then I pressed the glass to one swollen mark on my arm and cut. The pain was blinding. My vision swam. I nearly blacked out on the spot, but I kept going, sawing deeper until black liquid began to ooze from the wound. It smelled like rot, like wet earth and something dead left too long in the heat. I squeezed the wound with shaking fingers, desperate, sobbing, and saw something pale beneath the blood and dark fluid. A little white shape pushed upward, not bone, not a stone. A tooth. It forced its way through the slit in my skin, dragging root-like strands after it. Then it dropped onto the bathroom tile and began to move. Its roots twitched and scrambled like insect legs, carrying it across the floor. I stared in horror. Then another bump, split. Then another. All over my body, the pressure increased. The things inside me wanted out. I cut wherever I could reach. I squeezed and tore and dug, because I knew if I stopped, they would keep coming anyway. Teeth crawled free from my flesh, one after another, coated in black matter and blood, dropping to the floor and scurrying away on their root-like limbs. I collapsed onto the tile at some point, too weak to stand, barely able to lift the glass anymore. Around me, the bathroom floor clicked and rattled softly with movement. My skin burned. My blood mixed with black fluid and spread beneath me. Still, they kept emerging. Now I am writing this, while I still can. The harvest is almost done. I can feel the last of them shifting under the skin I have not yet opened. The room smells of blood and rot and wet soil. Every now and then I hear that same soft rattling sound from the corners. The air is heavy. It will come tonight. I know it will. Whatever planted them in me, whatever turned my teeth into seeds, whatever taught my body to obey while my mind watched helplessly from a distance. I understand now that I was never feeding a hunger of my own. I was being prepared. The teeth I lost were only the beginning. The teeth I saved, swallowed, buried, and worshipped were part of a cycle much older than me. Something was planted in me through them. Or perhaps it was always there waiting for the right moment to wake. Every dream was a lesson. Every pleasure was a leash. Every lost tooth was an offering. And now it is time for reaping. If anyone finds this, if anyone reads these words and thinks there is still time to save me, do not come close. Do not touch the things on the floor. Do not gather them up in your hands, thinking they are only teeth. Do not keep them in your mouth. Do not bury them. Most of all, if you hear rattling in the dark, do not answer it. It is almost here now. I can feel the room changing around me. The cold has deepened. The silence has weight. Something is waiting just beyond the edge of sight, patient and certain, ready to collect what has grown inside me. I do not know whether I am still meant to be the meal or whether I have become the field from which the meal is taken. Maybe there is no difference. Maybe there never was. All I know is that this did not end when my last tooth came out. That was only the point where it could begin in earnest. The cycle is not broken. It is opening. And if there is any mercy left in whatever watches over this world, let these words serve as warning. Do not defile it. Story 4. A while ago, when I was desperate for money, I found a strange job listing on a site that sat somewhere between a normal job board and something much darker. The post was short and simple. It said they needed a night watchman. The company name was Krusty Crewing Distribution. The pay was $4,000 a week. No experience needed. The only unusual line said applicants had to be comfortable with unconventional silence. That should have been enough to make me walk away, but I was drowning in debt and in no position to be careful. I ignored every warning sign and applied anyway. The building where I was sent for the interview stood on the edge of an industrial area, far from the main roads, hidden between dead lots and abandoned warehouses. It was a huge concrete structure with no windows, just thick gray walls rising up like a bunker. It looked less like a workplace and more like a sealed tomb. During the paperwork, I learned it had been built over the exact location where the original Krusty Krab flagship restaurant had burned down in what newspapers had called a freak grease fire back in 1990. The man who hired me looked almost as disturbing as the building itself. His skin was pale and loose, like wet paper left out in the rain. He spoke in a dry, cracked voice and handed me a flashlight, an old radio, and a heavy iron key that felt colder than it should have. He told me the mascots stayed in the Fun Zone basement. Then he gave me one final instruction, in a dead, flat tone. If I heard them laughing, I had to turn up the radio immediately. He told me never to let the frequencies match. I asked him what that meant, but he only stared at me and said I would understand if it happened. The moment I stepped inside for my first shift, I knew something was wrong with the place. From the outside, it looked like a normal warehouse, but inside, it felt impossible. The hallways were not straight. They curved gently, like I was walking through the inside of some huge shell instead of a building made by people. The walls were covered in a thick, clear slime that reflected my flashlight in soft, oily streaks. It smelled like old pennies, salt water, and something stale that reminded me of rotting fish. The air was freezing, much colder than it should have been, and every sound I made seemed to get swallowed up too quickly. My station was a glass-walled security booth that overlooked what the company called a recreation of the original restaurant. But it didn't feel like a recreation. It felt like the real place had somehow been trapped there, perfectly preserved and sealed in cold air. The tables were neatly set, the grills were polished, the menus were placed just right. Everything looked spotless, but there was no life in it. Sitting in that booth felt like being put on display. I had the horrible feeling that the darkness beyond the glass was studying me the same way I was studying it. For the first hour, nothing happened. I tried to settle in. I checked the monitors, looked through the logbook, and told myself this was just some weird marketing company with eccentric management. Then, at exactly 1:15 in the morning, the monitors turned on by themselves. I had not touched them. The screens flickered with static, then settled into camera feeds from around the building. One of them, camera 12, showed the room labeled Mascot Storage. In the far corner, leaning against a crate, was the SpongeBob mascot suit. It was not the cheerful cartoon image anyone would expect. It was huge, close to 8 feet tall, with a swollen, porous texture like a sponge left too long in dirty water. It looked soft and damp, but heavy at the same time. It was slumped over, as if it had been tossed there, yet its eyes were fixed straight at the camera. They were large yellow plastic spheres, but when I zoomed in, I saw thin black veins spreading through them like cracks under glass. I felt my stomach tighten. It looked less like a costume and more like something pretending to be one. I searched the desk for anything useful, mostly to distract myself. In one drawer, I found an old cassette player with a tape inside. The label read, Tom B. Voice sessions. Do not replay. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed play. At first it sounded harmless. A man's voice, cheerful and animated, was doing the familiar high-pitched laugh for the mascot shows. Then the laughing kept going. It went on far too long. After a minute, it started to sound strained. After 2, it became desperate. By 4 minutes, it had turned into choking, wet gasps that sounded painful to hear. Finally, the laughter stopped, and the man whispered through static, his voice weak and shaking. He said the foam was breathing for him now. He said the inside of the suit was cold, but the grease was warm. I shut the player off so fast I nearly broke it. When I looked back at the monitors, camera 4 showed something new. The Patrick mascot was standing in the middle of the dining room. I knew it had not been there moments earlier. It was shaped like a bloated pink star, but there was nothing funny about it. It moved in slow ripples, like a real sea creature dragging itself over land. Behind it, scraping across the floor, was a heavy rusted anchor chained to one of its limbs. The metal left a deep line in the wood as it moved. What frightened me most was the way it shifted. It did not move like there was a person inside a suit. It moved like the empty suit itself had decided to walk. Then I heard music coming through the vents. It was not cheerful music. It sounded like a slowed-down version of something familiar, played through a cracked clarinet. The notes dragged and warped, as if they were being forced through water. I looked up and caught movement along the ceiling beyond the booth. A gray shape was crawling there on 4 limbs. It was the Squidward mascot, but horribly changed. Its neck was stretched out far too long, hanging and twisting like pulled taffy. Its eyes were not cartoon eyes anymore. They looked wet and human, and thick black liquid streamed down its face. Every drop that hit the floor hissed softly like acid. It did not walk. It skittered, quick and stiff, like a spider imitating a person. At that point, panic started to set in. I left the booth and forced my way into the manager's office, because I thought there might be a weapon inside. Instead, I found a locked file cabinet. Inside was a stack of medical reports and company documents. One of them was labeled Secret Formula. I expected some kind of joke or fake branding material, but it was a real chemical report. The formula was not food-related at all. It was a compound designed to bond living organic matter to synthetic fibers. The original restaurant had not simply been a restaurant. It had also been a lab. According to the notes, the company had been trying to create eternal entertainers, living mascot beings that would never need sleep, never need food, and never stop performing as long as they were fed with the formula. The fire in 1990 had not destroyed the experiment. It had trapped it. I was still reading when I heard another sound behind me. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The slow, rubbery sound of boots on a polished floor. It was so close that I froze. I did not turn around. Instead, I looked into the reflection in the office glass. The SpongeBob mascot was standing in the doorway behind me. It was trembling so hard the edges of its body looked blurred. Its square mouth began to stretch open wider and wider until it passed the limits of the costume shape. Inside the darkness of its throat were rows of thin, jagged teeth, like sharpened coral. They were packed too tightly and gleamed wetly in the dim light. I grabbed the radio and tried to call the supervisor, but the speaker exploded with sound. Before I could speak, what came through was not static. It was screaming. It sounded like 1,000 children screaming on a ride at an amusement park, except the pitch kept changing up and down in waves that made my teeth hurt. Through it all came a cheerful voice asking, "Who lives in a nightmare under the sea. Then another voice answered, deep and monstrous, shaking the booth glass with the words, "The one who watches." My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the radio. Before I could decide what to do next, the entire floor began to vibrate. In the center of the recreated dining room was a heavy iron hatch labeled Grease Trap. It swung open by itself. Thick black sludge started pouring out of it in waves, glossy and slow. Mixed in with the sludge were hundreds of little metal spatulas, all moving on their own. They clicked and scraped across the floor like insects, swarming toward the stairwells and spreading through the room. In that moment, I understood something that made me feel even sicker. This building was not a warehouse. It was a hive, and I was the only thing in it that had not already been turned into part of it. Desperate for answers, I found a safe in the manager's office and forced it open. Inside was a VHS tape labeled SDR-86, The Retirement. There was an old monitor and player nearby, and against all common sense, I put the tape in. The footage was grainy and badly lit. It showed a dark room where the mascot characters stood in a loose circle around a man tied to a chair. I recognized the voice actor from the cassette. It was Tom. The SpongeBob mascot leaned over him, and instead of touching him normally, its yellow foam began to melt and spread over his face. Tom thrashed and screamed, but the screams slowly changed into that same high-pitched cartoon laugh. His body sank into the mascot's porous flesh, as if he was being absorbed. At the end of the tape, the creature turned toward the camera and said in a perfect cheerful voice, "I'm ready for a new skin." I ripped the tape out and ran. I headed for the emergency exit, but the layout of the building seemed wrong now, twisting away from the map in my memory. I pushed through a set of double doors and entered a giant glass dome area labeled Tree Dome. Inside stood a dead oak tree, under artificial lights. Hanging from the tree by the neck was the Sandy mascot. At first I thought it was just another dead costume, but then it twitched. The glass helmet over its head was filled with cloudy salt water. Pressed against the inside of the glass was a human face. The eyes were wide open. The mouth moved weakly. Somehow the person inside was still alive, drowning over and over in that helmet. I ran again, blindly this time. The overhead lights shifted to a deep purple glow that made every wall look bruised. I passed through a storage area filled with hanging translucent umbrellas that glowed softly in the dark. When I brushed against one, a shock ran through me so strong that I stumbled. But it was more than pain. For a split second, I felt a memory that was not mine. I was a child laughing at a cartoon on television, while something hidden behind the screen counted the rhythm of my heart. I touched another umbrella and felt another jolt, another strange borrowed memory. They were not decorations. They were stinging traps, storing fear inside them. When I finally reached the loading dock, I thought I was saved, but the huge door had been welded shut from the outside. Next to it stood a massive vat labeled Chum. I looked inside and nearly vomited. It was full of shredded human clothing, uniforms, security badges, shoes, and broken personal items. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. That was when I realized I had never really been hired. I had been delivered. I turned and found Patrick waiting for me in the break room doorway. Up close it smelled awful, like something ancient pulled up from the deepest part of the ocean. It leaned toward me, and the seam running down its chest opened wide. There was no empty space inside. The cavity was lined with purple flesh, suction cups, and slow-pulsing tissue. It lunged, trying to pull me into itself. I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a letter opener from a nearby desk, and stabbed it. A dark fluid spilled out, cold and foul-smelling, and the creature jerked backward long enough for me to escape. But by then, the whole building had changed around me. The anchor Patrick dragged was more than a prop. Somehow, it felt linked to my own thoughts. My vision filled with drifting bubbles. I heard a foghorn blowing inside my skull. My sense of direction slipped away. The more I saw the mascots, the more unreal the normal world felt. It was like they were infecting my mind, pulling me into their world the way the sea drags things under. Eventually, I stumbled into the main office and met the thing that had to be the boss. Sitting behind the desk was the Mr. Krabs mascot, massive and armored, easily 3 times the size of a man. Its red shell looked real. Its claws were huge and sharpened. It did not speak in words. It clicked its claws together in a steady rhythm, like counting coins. Snip, snip, snip. I understood with horrible certainty that it was counting profit, not money, but lives. Every person taken by the building was part of its business. By then, I could barely breathe. My lungs felt packed with sand. I looked down at my hands and saw my skin changing. Yellow, pitted, porous. The SpongeBob thing stood over me, close enough that I could smell the grease and salt in its damp body. It placed one soft, wet hand against my forehead and spoke in Tom's perfect, cheerful voice. It told me not to worry. It said the costume only hurt during the first hour. After that, all I had to do was forget how to breathe air. With the last of my strength, I reached the emergency kit near the wall and pulled out a flare gun. I could not fight them directly, and I knew I would never survive if I stayed down there. So I aimed up at the sprinklers and fired. The flare burst the pipe system overhead. But instead of water, the sprinklers sprayed the secret formula. The chemical rained down over the room in thick streams. The mascots hissed, not in pain, but pleasure. Their foam bodies swelled and expanded. Flesh and felt began to fuse together. Limbs merged. Faces stretched. Claws, coral teeth, tentacles, suction cups, and damp sponge flesh twisted into one huge mass. It was growing into something bigger than any single mascot had been. Something that looked like a pile of childhood nightmares stitched together. I do not remember how I escaped after that. My memory breaks apart there. One moment I was trapped in purple light and chemical mist, and the next I woke up on a beach miles away from the warehouse. It was morning. My clothes were half burned. My car was gone. My phone was gone. In the distance, smoke rose where the warehouse had stood. By the time I made my way back to the road and found help, the place was already a pile of ash. Officially, it was called another grease fire, like the first one. The story had finally come full circle. But the fire did not destroy everything. I know that because it left part of itself inside me. When I look in the mirror now, my eyes are not the same. In the corners, tiny black veins spread a little more each week. Sometimes my skin feels damp, even when I am dry. Sometimes I smell salt water where there is none. The worst part is my voice. When I try to speak for too long, my words start to crack and rise into a high-pitched laugh that I cannot control. It echoes strangely, like someone else is laughing with me, from somewhere just out of sight. I still dream about the warehouse. In the dreams, the restaurant is clean and bright, the grills are warm, and the tables are full of smiling people who never blink. The mascots stand at the edges of the room, waiting. The Mr. Krabs thing clicks its claws from behind the register. Patrick drags his anchor in circles. Squidward crawls along the ceiling, dripping black tears. Sandy swings in the tree dome, with that living face trapped in the helmet, and SpongeBob stands closest to me, smiling with Tom's voice trapped inside him forever. Sometimes, when I wake up, I feel something moving behind my own smile. I know now that the company was never just making characters, and it was never just selling food, or entertainment, or jobs. It was building replacements, new skins, new performers, living things trapped in shapes people trusted. That is what the formula was for. That is what the warehouse was for, and that is why they paid so much to bring in men like me. We were never guards. We were stock. I have tried telling people parts of this, but nobody believes me. They hear the words Krusty Krab and think it must be some joke, some sick prank, some story made up by a desperate man who took a bad job and cracked under the pressure. Maybe that is easier for them. Maybe they need it to be nonsense. But sometimes, late at night, when the room is silent and the air feels wet, I hear laughter rising in the walls. When that happens, I turn on a radio beside my bed and keep the volume high until morning. I do not know if it still works, but I remember what the supervisor said. Do not let the frequencies match. Because I am changing. Slowly, but I am changing. And whatever survived that fire is not gone. It is gathering itself again, somewhere dark and hidden, rebuilding what was lost. It is looking for the rest of the cast. It is looking for more voices, more bodies, more skin. And some nights, when I catch my reflection from the corner of my eye, I can already see what it wants me to become. I know I am not fully human anymore. I know I am becoming ready. And when they come back, I do not think they are coming for me alone. Story 5. I never really planned to become a diver. Not in any serious way. It was one of those jobs people drift into when the thing they actually wanted never happens, no matter how long they wait for it. I kept telling myself that something else would open up eventually, something closer to what I had studied, something that would make all those years feel like they had been leading somewhere. But nothing ever did. What I wanted was to cook, not just in some quiet little cafe either. I wanted a real kitchen, the kind where the heat never leaves the air, where pans slam against burners, where tickets pile up faster than you can read them, and people shout your name like it matters. I wanted that pressure. I wanted the speed, the noise, the feeling that if you were good enough, really good enough, you could become part of something sharp and alive. I studied for it. I finished the course. I worked hard enough that a couple of my instructors told me I had a real chance if I stayed with it. They said I had good hands, good instincts, the kind of focus you can't really teach. I believed them for a while, but belief doesn't pay rent. Restaurants don't care what your instructors said. They care whether you've already done the work somewhere else. Every place I applied to wanted experience. Experience needed a job. A job needed experience. It loops like that until you either get lucky or get tired enough to stop trying. Bills don't wait for luck, so I took what I could get. Something steady, something that came with training, something that didn't ask too many questions when I said yes right away. And what I got was underwater maintenance. The first time someone explained it to me, it sounded so simple that I actually thought I had misunderstood. I'm telling you, Rico said during my first week, it's not that bad. We were sitting on the edge of the dock with our legs hanging over the water. Even in daylight, the water looked wrong to me, darker than it should have been. Thick somehow. It smelled like rust, salt, and fuel. Like years of machinery and tide had mixed together into something permanent. You just clean? I asked. Yeah, that's it. That's it. He said it so casually that I looked at him to see if he was messing with me. He wasn't. He just shrugged and looked back down at the water. "Under there?" I asked. He laughed once through his nose. "Where else are the barnacles gonna be?" That's how they always describe it to people who've never done it. Simple. You go down, scrape barnacles and algae off the hull. Make sure the vessel moves better, uses less fuel, stays efficient. Hull cleaning. Nice clean term. Sounds almost harmless. What nobody tells you is what it feels like. Nobody tells you what it's like to be in the water under something so massive that your brain refuses to accept it properly. The first time I went down beneath a ship, I honestly thought it was going to fall on me. I know that sounds stupid. I know ships float. I know how water works, how buoyancy works, how weight works. I know all the logical explanations. But none of that matters when you are actually there, suspended under a wall of steel that stretches beyond the reach of your light. It doesn't feel like the ship is floating. It feels like it is hanging over you. It feels like someone placed a building on the ceiling of the sea and trusted physics to keep it there. And the longer you stay under it, the less those explanations matter, because your body starts reacting to something older than logic. It starts telling you that this thing should not be above you, that it is too large, too quiet, too heavy, and that if it decides to come down, there will not even be enough time for fear. "You'll get used to it," Rico said through the comms on that first dive. "I'm not used to it," I told him. "You're alive, right?" "Yeah." "Then you're getting used to it." That was how he was. Dry, calm. The kind of guy who acted like everything was obvious because he'd been doing it long enough to forget that it wasn't. The first few months were easy, or at least easy compared to what came later. Most of the work was near docks. Shallow water. Bad visibility, sure, but manageable. Enough daylight filtered through that you never felt fully cut off from the world above. You always had a line. You always had a clear route back. You always knew roughly where you were. You go down. You scrape. You move. You come back up. Routine. That matters more than people think. Out there, routine is not just habit. It is protection. When the water is dark and cold and full of shapes you can't really make sense of, routine is the one thing that still feels human. You hang on to it, because if you let go, your mind starts filling in the gaps with things you do not want to think about. Routine keeps your breathing steady. Routine keeps your hands from shaking. Routine keeps you from wondering what else might be down there besides what you were sent to clean. About 3 months into the job, I got my first open water assignment. It was a cargo ship anchored offshore, far enough from land that the water changed color on the way out. Near the harbor, the sea had that usual dirty green-brown look, churned up with oil and mud and movement. But farther out, it deepened into something darker. Blue at first, then almost black. "Why don't they just bring it in?" I asked while we loaded gear. Rico laughed. "You know how much that costs?" "No." "Exactly. The captain was a man named Alvarez. He didn't look how people imagine captains. No neat uniform, no polished shoes, no big dramatic presence. He wore an old work shirt and had the kind of face that looked permanently weathered, like sun and wind had been working on it for decades. "You the new guy?" he asked. "Yeah." He studied me for a second, not in a rude way, just measuring. "You panic?" "No." "You lie." I hesitated, and that made him smile a little. "Good," he said. "Means you think before you answer." The water around the ship felt wrong before I even got in. It wasn't just dark. It felt dense, like it had more weight in it than the water near shore. I know how that sounds. And maybe it was all in my head, but I remember standing on the edge before the descent and thinking that it looked less like water and more like a layer of something thick spread over a hole. "You'll be fine," Rico said while checking my gear. "Same job as always, just deeper." "How deep?" 40 meters, maybe a little less. "That's not the same as always." He tightened a strap and tapped my tank. "Relax. You trained for worse. Training's not real. Neither is panic," he said, "until you make it real." The first descent felt normal enough. Cold first, then pressure, then that strange narrowing of the world that happens underwater, where reality shrinks down to whatever your light touches and whatever your hands are currently doing. I focused on my breathing. In, out, in, out. "Comms check," Alvarez said, loud and clear. "You at the hull yet?" "Almost. It starts as a shadow in the dark, then turns into a shape, then into an impossible wall that blocks out what little light was left. And then suddenly, it is just there. Steel. Huge. And silent." "Jesus," I muttered before I could stop myself. "Big, right?" Rico said, "It doesn't feel real." "It is. Get started on the port side." So I did. I switched on the scraper and pressed it against the hull. The vibration ran up my arm in a way that felt almost comforting, because at least that part of the job was normal. Barnacles cracked loose in clusters. Bits of algae drifted away. The sound of work cut through the silence and gave me something familiar to hold on to. That is what made the first part of the dive manageable. Work. When your hands are busy, your mind behaves better. Time moves strangely underwater. You lose track of it fast because there is nothing natural to measure it by. No sun moving across the sky. No shifting shadows. No little reminders that minutes are passing. There is only your breathing, the scrape of metal on steel, and the changing pressure in your body. "How's it looking?" Alvarez asked after a while. "Normal build-up," I said. "Nothing unusual." And at that point, I believed it. For a while, it really did seem normal. Then I found the first clean patch. It was small enough that I almost missed it. A section of hull without buildup on it. No barnacles, no algae, no roughness. "Did someone start this already?" I asked. "No," Rico said. "You're the first one down there." I ran my glove across the patch. It didn't feel scraped. Freshly cleaned steel usually has a certain rough drag to it, a texture that tells you it was worked on recently. This didn't. It felt smoother than it should have, but not polished, more like worn. "Probably the current," Rico said. "Sometimes water hits certain spots harder." That made sense on paper. It was a decent explanation. The kind of explanation people accept because it lets them move on. So I moved on. That's one of the first bad habits you learn in jobs like that. If something doesn't fit, but it also doesn't stop you from finishing the job, you tell yourself it can wait. A few minutes later, I heard something. Not clearly, not enough to name it, just enough to notice. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" I stopped scraping and listened. Nothing. "Don't chase sounds," Alvarez said through the comms. So I didn't. But after that, I started noticing more things. The barnacles no longer looked random. They started forming loose lines, patterns that seemed almost deliberate if you looked too long. The clean patches showed up more often, not clustered, spaced, like gaps. I kept telling myself not to make meaning out of things that didn't need meaning. Water and time do strange things to surfaces. That was true. I knew it was true. But the longer I stayed down there, the less the hull felt like dead steel, and the more it felt like something that had been touched. Not recently, not violently, repeatedly. It also didn't feel empty around me. I had been in dark water before. There is a difference between a place that is empty and a place that only looks empty. This felt like the second kind, like there was something just outside the reach of the light, not moving exactly, but present. I kept working. Routine. That was the word I held on to. Then I found the marks. These were not like the clean patches. They were deeper, larger, pressed into the hull in a way that didn't match current or debris or impact damage. They looked like something had leaned against the steel over and over again. Not one thing, maybe several, or maybe one shape more than once. "Pull back a bit," Alvarez said. I did, and for 1 second I thought the marks changed. Not dramatically, just slightly, enough that I couldn't be sure whether it had actually happened, or whether my eyes were starting to play games with me. I said nothing. When I got back on deck, nobody pushed too hard. They asked what I saw, and I described the marks as carefully as I could, without sounding unstable. They listened. That part stuck with me later. No jokes, no dismissal, just listening. Then Alvarez told me to go back down. I didn't argue. That surprised me afterward, but at the time it made sense. Part of me needed to know whether I had imagined it. Another part knew I hadn't. The second dive was worse before it even started. The first time down, you still have curiosity. The second time, you have memory. You know exactly where you are going, and you know the water is not going to feel better just because you understand it more. The descent felt colder, darker too, though that might have been because my nerves were already shot. I kept my breathing under control, but only just. The hull appeared again, same as before. Shadow, shape, steel. Do the section you skipped. Alvarez said. I wanted to ask why me? Why not Rico? Why not anyone else? But the answer was obvious. I had already seen it. Sending someone else would only delay things. So I moved back toward the section with the marks. The scraper slid over the patch without catching. That was the first thing. If buildup had been there, I should have felt resistance. If bare steel had been there, I should have felt texture. Instead, the tool glided as if it were passing over something too smooth and too thin at the same time. Then something tapped from the other side. Not hard, not angry, just a light, deliberate touch. I froze so completely that for a second I forgot to breathe. That's not possible, Alvarez said. I don't know whether he meant it for me or for himself. I put my glove against the surface again. This time, it did not feel like metal. I don't know how else to say that. I know how ridiculous it sounds. But it didn't feel solid in the way steel should. It felt layered, like there was a surface there pretending to be one thing, while something else sat behind it. It's probably residue, Rico said, but he didn't sound convinced. Then I found the edge. A section near the mark had begun lifting slightly, almost like old paint peeling away from a wall. I reached for it before I could talk myself out of it, and pressed my fingers against the loose part. It bent, too easily. Hull plating should not bend like that under a gloved hand. I leaned closer. Underneath it was darkness, yes, but not the ordinary darkness of water and shadow. It was a depth, a space, bigger than it should have been, bigger than anything behind that section of hull had any right to be. And something moved inside it. I still don't know what I saw. I only know I was not supposed to see it. It was not shaped in a way my mind could hold on to. It shifted in a way that made the inside of my skull feel wrong, like my brain was trying to translate something it wasn't built for. "There's something in there," I said. "Come back up," Alvarez said immediately. That time I didn't hesitate. I turned, found the line, and started climbing. Halfway up, the line went tight. Not tangled, not caught. Held. I knew the difference right away. If a line snags, there is a certain give to it, a vibration, a direction you can work with. This wasn't that. This was steady pressure from below. Deliberate, like someone had wrapped a hand around it and simply decided not to let go. "Cut the line," I said. There was a pause above me. Then Rico said, "Hold on. Cut the line." This time, Alvarez gave the order. A moment later, the tension vanished so suddenly it nearly spun me. I kicked hard and shot upward, too fast, faster than I should have. And something followed me. I didn't see it, not directly, but I felt it there behind me, keeping the same distance the whole way up. No rush, no panic, no hunting, just presence. The worst part was how calm it felt, as if it had no doubt whatsoever that I could not really escape it. I wanted so badly to look back. Every part of me wanted confirmation. Shape, size, truth. But I knew, with the absolute certainty fear sometimes gives you, that if I turned around and saw it properly, something would change in me for good. So I didn't. I broke the surface half blind, with panic, and hauled myself onto the deck, harder than I needed to. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unclasp the gear. "It wasn't stuck," I said as soon as I could speak. Something was holding it. No one laughed. No one argued. That silence told me more than any answer could have. We left shortly after that. No long discussion. No dramatic confrontation. Just work, shutting down in a quiet, efficient way that made it clear everyone had already decided something. I quit 2 days later. I didn't give them a reason. They didn't ask. And if things had been normal, that would have been the end of it. A bad experience, a weird assignment, another job I walked away from, because sometimes that's all you can do. But it didn't end there. Last week, I saw the ship again. It was docked. That alone should not have meant anything. Ships come and go. Jobs happen. Life moves. But the second I saw it, I knew something was wrong. It was clean. Not normal clean. Not professionally maintained clean. Too clean. The hull looked stripped in a way that made it seem unfinished. Exposed. Almost raw. I should have turned around right then. Instead, I walked closer. I didn't even decide to. My body just started moving. That's the part I hate admitting the most. It felt like being pulled towards something unfinished. Not curiosity exactly. More like recognition. I got close enough to lean over and look down. The patches were still there. There were more of them now, spread out in a pattern. Not damage, not wear, intentional space. I stared at them longer than I should have, trying to understand what they resembled without actually letting myself finish the thought. And then, one of them shifted. Only slightly. Only enough to be sure. It wasn't the hull. It was something using the hull. That was when I left. I turned around and walked away so fast I nearly ran. I did not look back, not even once. I have not gone near open water since that day. Not the harbor, not the docks, not even the shoreline at night. But distance has not helped as much as I hoped it would. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and there is nothing else making noise, I still hear it. Not tapping, not knocking, just a faint presence at the edge of sound. so soft that if I focus on it, it almost disappears. But if I relax for even a second, it comes back, the way pressure comes back in an old scar when the weather changes. It sounds like something waiting, like something still holding on. And the worst thing is this: I cannot stop thinking about the patches. At first, I tried to explain them. Corrosion, repairs, residue, some weird marine growth. But that only worked until I saw them again on the docked ship. There is no explanation now that makes me feel human-sized, because once you see something shift when it should not, once you realize the empty space isn't empty at all, explanations stop helping. I have started thinking about the ocean differently. Before that job, the ocean was just water to me. Big, dangerous, unpredictable. Sure, but still just water. A place people work on, travel across, get lost in. A place with storms and currents and depth. Natural danger. Understandable danger. Now I don't think that way anymore. Now I think the ocean only looks empty, because most of us never get close enough to notice what is using the emptiness. People talk about deep water like it's mysterious, because we haven't explored all of it yet, like it's a map with missing pieces. That's not how it feels to me now. It feels more like something that stays hidden on purpose. Not because it is impossible to find, but because whatever is down there has no reason to let itself be known, unless you get too close. And maybe we do. Maybe ships do. Maybe that is why some hulls come back with marks no one can explain. Maybe that is why some jobs get handed off quietly and never talked about afterward. Maybe that is why Alvarez did not argue when I said something held the line. Sometimes I wonder how many other divers have seen things they never reported properly. How many men came back up with stories they swallowed because no one wants to be the guy who says the ship felt wrong. How many captains already know enough to keep their mouths shut? How many clean hulls are not really clean at all? That thought keeps coming back to me, especially late at night. The ocean is not as empty as it seems. That sounds dramatic when I say it out loud, but it doesn't feel dramatic when I lie awake hearing that almost sound at the edge of my room. It feels simple, obvious even, like I only ever believed in emptiness because it was easier than imagining the alternative. I still think about kitchens sometimes. I think about the life I almost had. Heat, noise, people, sharp knives and shouted orders, and the smell of garlic hitting hot oil. I used to think I missed that because it was what I wanted. Now, I think maybe I miss it because it was solid. Because there are no endless dark spaces above you in a kitchen. Because nothing in a kitchen feels like it is hanging there, waiting for you to look away. Because if something taps from the other side of a wall in a kitchen, there is at least a wall you can understand. I don't know what was under that ship. I don't know if it was inside the hull, behind it, attached to it, or using it as some kind of cover. I don't know whether it was one thing or many. I don't know whether it followed me because I touched it, because I saw it, or because it had already noticed me long before that. I only know what it felt like, the line going tight in my hands, the certainty that something below had chosen to keep me there, the sense rising too close behind me, that I was not being chased, I was being measured. That part has stayed with me more than anything else. Not that it wanted me, not even that it could have taken me, but that it seemed completely unbothered by the idea that I might leave. Like it had time, like the ocean gives it all the time it could ever need. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, I lie still and listen. If the room stays quiet long enough, I start to feel that same pressure I felt underwater. Not on my body exactly, more in my head. A sense that if I looked in the wrong direction, or thought too hard about the wrong memory, I would find it closer than it should be. So, I don't look. I keep the lights on sometimes. I sleep with the television running just to keep some other sound in the room. I avoid the docks. I avoid boats. I avoid conversations about diving, because I know I can't explain any of this without hearing how insane it sounds. Still, none of that changes what I know. The water hides things easily. That much everyone understands. What they don't understand is that some things hide in ways that are not passive. They do not simply exist out there waiting to be discovered. They blend in. They press themselves into surfaces. They leave spaces where there should be matter and make those spaces look accidental. They stay just outside the range of light and shape and proof. And if you happen to touch one of those places, if you happen to peel back the wrong layer and glimpse the depth behind it, then maybe it notices you too. That is what I think now when I hear the faint, almost sound at the edge of hearing. Not tapping, not calling, just reminding. Like something down there still has a hold on part of me. Like the line was cut, but not completely. I didn't plan on carrying the ocean home with me. But some nights, when the house is quiet enough, I can feel that same waiting silence pressing against the walls. And I know with a certainty, I wish I didn't have, that whatever lives down there does not stay down there as neatly as we want to believe. People like to think of the sea as empty, because emptiness is easier. It is easier to imagine miles of cold, dark water with nothing in it than to imagine something vast enough to live there without ever needing us to understand it. I don't think the ocean is empty. I think it is occupied. And I think, every now and then, something beneath the surface presses itself against the underside of our world, just hard enough to leave a mark. Story 6. In my late teens, I worked at a golf course. I left that job years ago, and most of what happened there faded into the kind of memories people laugh about later. I remember the rude golfers who acted like the course belonged to them, especially the drunk ones who wanted to argue over nothing. I remember the geese too, those evil birds that would chase workers and golfers alike every season, like they had a personal grudge against all of us. Looking back, a lot of that feels funny now, but there is one thing from that job that has never felt funny, not even years later. No matter how many times I replay it in my head, I still cannot explain it. I have only told a few people about it, maybe 3 at most, and only because they knew me back then and knew I worked that job through high school. Even then, I never went into full detail the way I probably should have. Maybe because saying it out loud makes it feel too real. I worked at that golf course as a kind of groundskeeper. It was not some fancy title, and the work was mostly whatever needed doing. I started each season around the middle of March, and usually stayed until sometime in December, depending on how long the weather held up, and whether anyone still wanted to play in the cold. It was the kind of job where you learned to do a little of everything: cleaning carts, storing equipment, locking up buildings, checking things around the property, handling all the quiet end-of-day tasks when the golfers were gone and the place stopped feeling like a business and started feeling like a wide, empty piece of land. I liked the work more than I expected to. It was tiring sometimes, and the people could be annoying, but there was something peaceful about being outside and working with your hands while the day slowly changed around you. The thing that happened took place in March, near the beginning of the season. The day had been slow from the start. It was still cold enough that the course had not fully come back to life yet, and not many people were eager to spend hours outside hitting balls into half-frozen ground. I had worked late that evening, later than I usually wanted to, until the sun had already gone down and the last of the carts had been stored away in the barn for the night. Everything was quiet by then. No voices, no engines, No movement, just that stillness that comes when a place built for people suddenly has none left in it. I finished locking up, made sure everything was secure, told my boss I was heading out, and walked into the parking lot to go home. That part was completely normal. I had done it many times before. There was nothing strange in the air, no warning feeling, nothing to suggest that the drive home would be any different from the dozens of others I had made after closing. The course was out near the countryside, close to a small village, and the route I usually took home ran through quiet roads that passed farmland, scattered houses, and long empty stretches where there was barely any light at all. I knew those roads well. By that point, I had driven them so many times I could almost have done it without thinking. I remember that night clearly because everything about it felt ordinary, right up until it wasn't. I got in my car and started driving through the dark country roads, cutting through the small village and then onto the back roads that took me toward the main roads I used to get home. The houses in that area were all spread apart, sitting alone on chunks of land, with long driveways and dark windows. Between them were open fields, fences, and the kind of ditches that run alongside rural roads and remind you very quickly that these are not city streets. I had the heat on in the car because the air outside was still cold, but after a while, it got too warm inside, so I cracked my driver's side window just a little. I was not using my high beams. I was driving slowly, a few miles under the speed limit, the way people often do on those roads at night, when there is no reason to rush and every turn feels darker than it should. The only real light on that route came from a single lamp hanging above a three-way intersection, near a school and a church. Once you passed that point, the darkness felt heavier. That light would slowly shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. And then it was just you, your headlights, and whatever happened to be out there with you. I had music playing. Before I left work, I had put on the album AM by Arctic Monkeys, and it had been playing quietly as I drove. That detail always sticks with me for some reason. Maybe because the music made the whole night feel normal. Maybe because I remember exactly what it felt like to be sitting there, window cracked, warm air in the car, cold air slipping in from outside, familiar songs playing while I followed a road I could have mapped in my sleep. As I got farther down the road and closer to the turn that would bring me toward the main highway, I saw something ahead of me. At first, it was just a small reflective movement in the middle of the road, swaying from side to side in the beam of my headlights. My first thought was that it had to be a cyclist. The motion fit. It looked like the small reflector you would see at the back of a bike, catching the light every time the rider shifted. But even before I got close enough to really see it, something about that explanation felt wrong. It was cold out, for one thing, and not the kind of night when you would expect someone to be casually biking through dark farmland roads. More than that, cyclists out there usually had proper reflective gear or lights, especially if they were riding at night. This thing had none of that. No blinking lights, no reflective jacket, just that one small reflective point moving in an odd, swaying way. I kept driving slowly, watching it. The closer I got, the stranger it looked. It was in the middle of the road, and then, suddenly, it dropped off to the side and disappeared into the ditch. That got my full attention. If you have never driven through farmland, it might be hard to picture the kind of ditches I mean. These were not shallow roadside dips or little drainage cuts. They were deep, wide trenches, almost the width of a small one-lane road in some places, and deep enough that if a person or bike went into one the wrong way, it could be serious. In colder months, there could be water down there, and if it had frozen over or partly frozen, that could make things even worse. So when I saw what I thought was a cyclist go straight down into one of those ditches, my first reaction was concern. I slowed down and stopped my car. For a few seconds, I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, staring at the ditch and trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to get out and check. That seemed like the obvious thing. If someone had crashed, especially out there in the middle of nowhere at night, they might be hurt or stuck. But another part of me hesitated. I do not know if it was fear or simple uncertainty. Maybe it was just the strange feeling that had started to build in my chest when I realized how little sense the whole thing made. I sat there, engine running, headlights pointed at the ditch, waiting to see if a person would stand up or if I would hear shouting or movement. What came out of that ditch was not a person. It climbed up from the darkness, slowly enough for me to see it clearly in the headlights. And from the first second I saw it, every part of me knew something was wrong. The shape was like a dog, or close enough to one that my brain tried to force that explanation on me right away. But it was too large, much too large. Bigger than any normal dog I had ever seen. Its fur looked black in the headlights, thick in some places and patchy in others, like it was dirty or mangy. The body was wrong in a way that is hard to explain. Its limbs looked too long, too stretched out, especially the front ones, like they had been pulled beyond the shape they were supposed to have. It did not move like an injured animal. It moved with control. Its eyes reflected yellow in the headlights, bright and sharp in a way that caught me off guard. When it lifted its head toward my car, I saw its face more clearly. The muzzle looked rough and ragged. The mouth pulled back to show its teeth, and its lips were this horrible grayish-pink color, like skin that should not have been exposed to the air. It bared its teeth at me, not in panic, not like an animal startled by headlights, but like it was warning me, like it knew I was there and wanted me to understand that it had seen me too. I cannot explain why that detail has always stayed with me the most. It was not just that it looked strange. It was the way it looked at me. There was a kind of awareness in it that felt wrong, too focused, too deliberate. For a second, neither of us moved. I was frozen behind the wheel, and it stood there, half in the ditch, half on the roadside, staring into the car. My music was still playing quietly at that point, but it sounded far away. Everything did. All I could hear clearly was the engine idling and the rush of blood in my ears. Then it crept away. It did not run. It did not bolt in fear like a normal animal probably would after being caught in headlights. It moved slowly, almost carefully, backing away from the road and into the dark field beside it. The field was bare, just open farmland with no cover. But somehow the darkness swallowed it quickly. One moment it was there, its long body low to the ground, and the next it was fading into blackness, like it belonged there more than it had ever belonged in the light. That was enough for me. I rolled up my window immediately. I do not remember deciding to do it. I just remember the panic of wanting the glass between me and whatever I had seen. I turned off the radio because suddenly I did not want any noise at all. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel too tightly, eyes jumping constantly to the rearview mirror and the side mirrors, because I was terrified that if I looked away too long, I would somehow see it behind me. That drive felt much longer than it really was. Every shadow near the road looked wrong. Every mailbox or fence post in the headlights made my chest tighten until I recognized what it was. I kept imagining I would glance in the mirror and see those yellow eyes again. Closer this time, somehow keeping pace with the car. I do not remember speeding. If anything, I think I drove even more carefully than before, because panic can sometimes make you painfully aware of every movement you make. When I got home, I did not tell anyone right away. I think part of me wanted to pretend it had not happened, or at least convince myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe it was a coyote with mange, I thought. Maybe a large dog. Maybe the darkness, the headlights, and the ditch made it look stranger than it really was. I tried all those explanations because they were easier than accepting the way it had actually looked. But every time I replayed it, the same details came back. The reflective sway in the road. The way it seemed like a cyclist at first. The way it dropped into a ditch that should have hidden it completely. The way what came out was not a person, not carrying a bike, not anything that made sense. The size of it, the fur, the stretched limbs, the yellow eyes, the lips peeling back from the teeth. I kept thinking about that too. If it had really been some kind of normal animal, what was the reflective thing I saw first? I never saw a bike. I never heard a crash that sounded like metal. I never saw anything in the ditch except the thing that came out of it. That part bothered me almost as much as the creature itself. It was like the road had shown me one thing until I got close enough, and then it had become something else entirely. In the days after, I remember driving that road again because I had to. It was part of my route, but I drove differently after that. I used my mirrors more. I kept my windows up. I watched the ditches every time my headlights passed over them. I would tense up as I approached that same stretch of road, half expecting to see some sign of what I had seen before. A dead animal. Tracks. Something broken in the ditch. Anything. There was nothing. No bicycle. No mark in the roadside. No sign that anything had gone down into the ditch at all. The fields looked exactly the same as always, flat and empty, under whatever sky happened to be overhead. And it never happened again. That should make me feel better, I guess. If it happened only once, maybe it was some strange misreading of an ordinary event. Maybe my tired brain turned a coyote into something monstrous. Maybe the darkness did the rest. I have tried very hard to believe that over the years. But the reason I still think about it now is because deep down, I do not believe that is what happened. I know what fear feels like. I know what surprise feels like. This was something different. It was that deep, immediate feeling that your brain has recognized danger before your thoughts have caught up. The kind of fear that does not come from imagination, but from instinct. Something in me knew that what I was looking at was wrong. I have gone over every part of the memory so many times that certain details feel sharper now than they did then. I remember the way the road looked under my headlights. I remember the cold outside and the too warm air inside the car. I remember exactly where the light from the intersection disappeared behind me. I remember the music cutting through the silence until I turned it off. I remember the pause before I decided not to get out of the car. More than anything, I remember the feeling that if I had opened that door and stepped onto the road, I might not have made it home. That may sound dramatic, but it is the truth. There was no attack. It did not chase me. It did not slam itself against the car or do anything out of some horror movie. And maybe that is part of why it still bothers me. There was no ending, no explanation, no final proof. Just one impossible moment in the headlights, and then darkness taking it back. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had reacted differently, if I had gotten out to help the cyclist I thought I had seen, if I had stepped closer to the ditch and called out, if I had been slower to roll up the window. Those thoughts never go anywhere good, so I usually stop them before they go too far. I do not want to know what it was. That has stayed true from the first night until now. It is one thing to tell yourself there are still things in the world you cannot explain. It is another to stand in front of one of them, even if only through a windshield, and realize that explanation would not make it better. Whatever I saw that night was out there on that road before I reached it, and it was still out there after I left. That thought still unsettles me, not because I think it is waiting for me specifically, but because it means the world is wider and stranger than I like to admit. For most people, scary stories come from the woods, from abandoned houses, from places already marked as creepy. This happened on an ordinary drive home, after an ordinary shift at a golf course. That is what makes it stay with me. Nothing about the night announced itself as unusual. If I had left 10 minutes earlier or later, maybe I would have seen nothing at all and forgotten the drive completely. Instead, I got one glimpse of something I still cannot fit into a normal explanation, and that glimpse has stayed with me longer than the job itself. Years have passed now. I have had other jobs, lived through bigger things, and moved on from that part of my life. But every now and then, usually late at night when I am driving through a quiet area with no streetlights and open land on either side, I think about that road again. I think about the reflective sway in the distance and the choice to stop the car. I think about those yellow eyes looking back at me from the ditch. And every single time, I keep driving.